And joining me today from Canberra, the newly elected independent MP for Bradfield, Nicolette Boele. Welcome to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's great to be here.
Lovely to have you for your first political forum on the ABC. We promise to be gentle.
Good.
Senator Andrew Bragg, lovely to have you with us too.
Chris, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, particularly because Professor Andy Marks just wandered in and I just said, what title do I give you? And he said Professor in the Wild, which could mean he'll go feral, just not with Nicolette today. Andy, welcome.
I'll behave. G'day.
He's also a political scientist, by the way. It's great to have you all here. I thought we'd start off on quite a serious note, looking at the Israel-Iran war. Has the US done the right thing in bombing Iran's nuclear facilities? Andy, let's start with you.
Oh, look, short answer, Chris, is no, and for a couple of reasons. For the ethical reason that it makes it very hard for countries like Australia and globally for countries to stand up and do the right thing in accordance with the rules-based order if you have countries act unilaterally. And that means, you know, our capacity to stand up for Ukraine, our capacity to ensure that Taiwan maintains its integrity. Those things are compromised when, a big superpower just does what it likes, when it likes. And I think that we saw the consequences of that with the Iraq war, the Blair and Bush dossier didn't eventuate with respect to weapons of mass destruction. So it's not a great idea to just go off as they have done in the US. I think the other element for us too is tactically, the days of big conventional armies and defence forces facing off against each other are over. Yes, they may have unleashed devastating force or these bunker-busting bombs on particular sites, but it's asymmetrical warfare now. It's imbalanced warfare. So they can't really guard against the things like the drone attack we saw, for example, Ukraine do in Russia. So it's not always overwhelming force that wins the day. So for ethical reasons and for tactical reasons, I don't think it was a good idea.
Senator Andrew Bragg, I'm pretty certain you're going to have a very different point of view.
Well, Iran is a pariah and it has really gone out of its way to repress its own citizens for almost 5 decades now. And it has sought to acquire a nuclear weapon. It hasn't complied with the inspection arrangements, and the United States has now acted to ensure that Iran cannot capture a nuclear capability. And I think that is a very good thing for humanity, because this is one of the worst regimes on the planet, if not the worst. I make that clear distinction between the Iranian regime and the Iranian people, and they should not be given an opportunity to have a humanity-destroying bomb.
Nicolette Boele, do you think the US has done the right thing in bombing Iran's nuclear facilities?
So I kind of agree a little bit with both Andy and Senator Bragg, insofar as I've heard from 2 Iranian Australians in the electorate just in this last week, and both of them are in Australia for the very reason that Senator Bragg was talking about, that the situation conditions of the regime there in Iran is not a healthy one for its citizens, or nobody wants an arms race on nuclear weapons, of course. But I do believe very strongly, as we see the rise of authoritarianism across the globe, that certainly we Australians value very much the international rules-based order, and if we deviate from this, if we back in the United States' actions here, we do exactly that. We lose that ability to hold other nations to account on this very rule. And this is the rule that gives us these freedoms that we so dearly cherish here in Australia. And so my personal view on this is I'd rather have diplomacy and de-escalation and dialogue over what we've seen here in the last 24 hours.
I guess the other side of it, though, is that if you allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon and Iran uses that nuclear weapon, the rules-based order becomes largely irrelevant.
I think it's sort of, I'm not an expert in these issues, but when I'm reading the commentary from experts, I think that's still in question, whether or not that's Iran has that capability right now. And the last thing that I want, let's not have short memories, is, when we went into Iraq with our allies, because there were weapons of mass destruction, we don't want a repeat of that. When the West gets involved in issues in the Middle East, it just doesn't end well for anybody. So that's, I suppose, why I'm sitting here very nervously, like probably so many other people right across Australia and the world, in fact, watching what's unplaying right now.
In its initial response yesterday, the federal government didn't put anybody up and instead sent out a statement. It's copped some criticism for doing that. The Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, appeared on television this morning. We then heard from the Prime Minister at around 11:30 this morning. Here's some of what Anthony Albanese had to say.
The world has long agreed that Iran cannot be allowed to get a nuclear weapon, and we support action to prevent that, and that is what this is. The US action was directed at specific sites central to Iran's nuclear program. We don't want escalation and a full-scale war.
Senator Bragg, what do you think of the federal government's response?
Well, I think it's a bit mealy-mouthed. I mean, it's a values issue. Either you support the position that Iran should be disarmed or you don't. And I would say to you that sure, it's all very nice for people to say you want to have dialogue, but I mean, you want to have dialogue with a regime that funds terrorism like Hamas, Hezbollah, and brutally represses its own citizens, particularly women, and has done so since the regime started in 1979. So I think, look, no one ever wants to see robust military actions unless it's necessary, and I think in this case, clearly we've crossed the Rubicon because the regime was determined to acquire a weapon. It was determined to destroy its neighbour Israel, and it had failed to comply with inspection. So I think it is a reasonable position that Australia supports this action, and I'm pleased that it has bipartisan support.
Nicolette, what do you think of the federal government's response?
Look, I completely agree that the federal government, that Iran must not be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons. I mean, that's a shared global concern, but the means and the ends I don't think match up insofar as I think we can be firm on nuclear non-proliferation without backing in the actions that escalate conflict and risk regional and even global instability, to be honest. So whilst there are leading experts out there who have in question the legality of the decisions that are made here in this unilateral decision to take on these three sites in Iran, I think then the Australian public in particular deserves to know why the government has made that decision, and clearly to the largest extent possible. I understand there's intelligence and security matters that can't necessarily be shared for various reasons, but why we have put our neck out on this and what we expect next from the United States and from Iran. And if we are going to play a role in this, we need to be clear with the Australian public what that role is, why, and what success looks like.
Professor Andy Marks, what do you think of the government's response?
Chris, Nicolette's right. I think, it's not a grey area. This is, these are actions that contravene international law. And Australia's position on the weekend initially in saying that they recognised, what had occurred, effectively was, I think, not a neutral position. It was saying that we're monitoring the situation, but it's a breach of international law. And whether or not it feels good to come out and back in the strikes, or whether or not it scores you points in the context of your alliance, there's a lot of money invested in this submarine steel. There's a lot of ties with respect to economic and other imperatives for Australia. Don't confuse that. Stick to the law. It's pretty simple. And I think that's the kind of statement that Australians were looking for, one that acknowledged that it happened, but also acknowledged that this is not the way to do things.
But to Nicolette's point, we've had Andrew Hastie out and about today saying we need to know where the limits lie in our alliance with the US. Do we need to know that? Do we need to have a conversation about that, Professor Andy Marks?
I think we do. Chris, I reckon we can actually set them. We're big and bad enough to say that, look, these are the things that we accept. And Australia is not new to that. Doc Evatt and all of those people that had a role in creating the UN back in the day were very clear about what's required of a nation as an international citizen. And Australia seems reluctant to step up to that plate again. It's not like we don't know how, and it's in Labor's blood. So effectively, Labor can really return to its roots in this situation and say, these are the things we accept, and these are the things that we won't tolerate. And if you're breaking the law, it's pretty simple.